In this video, I'll show you how to create both SQL Server and Windows logins, map them to database users, and grant read or write access to specific databases. This is perfect for DBAs and developers. After you install a SQL Server instance and you create your database and your tables and everything you want to create in it, you need to grant access to people who will use that server or the database or the tables that you have in the server. It brings us to talking about logins and users. Logins are very different from users. Logins give you access, server level access. So it gives you access to the server. You may have access to the server, but not have access to do anything in that server or to even get into a database or view anything in the server. So we can say that we use logins for authentication, getting into the servers. Users, on the other hand, are database level security principles. They are used for getting access to the databases or the tables that you have in a server. So after you log in, you have access to login. Then if you're a user on a database, then you have access to that database, depending on the permissions that you're given. After you've gained access to the server, for you to be able to gain access to the databases in the server, you need to be added as a user of that database. And the level of access that you have to the database or the objects in the database will depend on the permissions that you have been given for that database. Now, when we talk about logins, there are two types of logins. You have the Windows login and you have the SQL Server login, or we can say Windows authentication, which uses Active Directory. And we also have SQL Server authentication using a username and a password. So first, we'll go ahead and create logins, both Windows login and SQL login. And then we will map them to databases, creating users and grant permissions to those users for the specific databases that we want them to access. I have my SQL Server Management Studio up. And if we expand this node and we come over to security, we see logins. This gives you access to the server. When we expand logins, we see some special logins and system logins, which will be these ones and these ones right here. Now, you also see a login here that says node1 backslash OSER. You see another one here that says SVL backslash OSER. These are Windows logins. So whenever you see these logins, user logins created using domain/user or domain /user, that's a Windows login. For SQL login, it's just going to be like this SA right here, without any slash or backslash in between, because there's no domain for it to attach itself to. If we close this up and then expand our databases, I have a database here, DemoDB. If I go ahead to click on this plus sign to expand, it also has security underneath. And if I expand security and go to users, here we would see the users of that database. I have no users created. So now we'll go ahead and create logins and create users or map those logins to the database, and we'll be able to see the names of those users here, or the people that will be able to have access to this database called DemoDB. So first, I'm going to go ahead and create a Windows login. For us to have a Windows login to have access to SQL Server, that person must first exist in the Active Directory. So I'll bring up my domain controller on another server right here, and we'll go ahead to create a user, a Windows user in Active Directory. So right click. New, and we'll go to user. And for this user, let's go ahead and call them, let's say window user 1. For the password, let's go ahead and use a strong password. And just for this case, I'm just going to say that the password never expires, just because we're doing a demonstration. This is not how it would be in a usual environment, because you would be required to change your password once you are given access like this. So we'll say OK, and I'll go ahead and say OK, and we have a Windows user created. So back to my SQL Server and bring down the Active Directory. I'm going to refresh SQL Server, and then we can come to Security and right click on Logins, New Login, click on that. And remember, we're doing Windows user, Windows authentication. We just created a Windows user. So I'm going to go to search and type in window user. That was the name we did. We did not add S to the Windows. We just said window user 1, but I'll click on location, check entire directory because I know it's inside this domain. And for the object types, users, this is selected. So I know it's in here, but I'm just going to check on check group 2. So click on check names, and that user we created shows up. I'm going to say OK. And with this, we can go ahead and click OK, and we'll create the user. But there are a couple of other tabs right here that are very important. If I come to roles, here, I'm just giving it the public role. I'll drop a link in the description where we can take a look at these roles and the server roles, because these are very important. Now, when you're creating logins and users in SQL Server, we adhere to the principle of least privilege. So you don't want to give them access that they don't need or the powers that they don't need. And that's why when you create a user, ordinarily by default, it's given the public role. So you don't have any power to do anything in that server. So I'm going to leave it as public. And if you come to user mapping, you can then associate that user or that login to a specific database. If we associate the login to a specific database, it will automatically create a user in that database so that that login that we created will be able to access that specific database. I will not map this login to any database, just for us to see how it looks like when you're not mapped to a database, when you're not a user of any database. And under here, we also have them as on the public role. And for the status, I'm leaving it as the grant. Securables, this is something else we need to talk about. So go back to general. If you want to script this out just to see how it looks like, we can script this to a new query window, and you can use that script to recreate. I'm going to click on OK. And then if I come over here and I refresh, we would see here that we have the new login that we created, and it's right here, window user 1. And this is the script that created that login. We see this create login. We see the login name, domain / user from Windows. So you can see that when we created this, we didn't even have to put in any password because it's getting that login information from Active Directory from Windows. Now, let's go take a look at how we would create a login that is not from Windows, that is not using Windows authentication. So if I right click and then create new login, this time I'm going to select SQL Server Authentication. We can see here it's requiring me to put in the password. So for the name, I'm going to put SQL user, SQL user 1. And for the password, I'll use a strong password. Enforce password policies, we definitely will do this in a production environment. But because this is a lab, I'm going to uncheck this one that says user must change password at next login. Because if I leave that checked, when this user logs in, they will be required to change their password. That's for the first time. But because this is a lab, I'm going to take that off because I don't want to have to do that. The same process will apply here as when we created the Windows login. The only different thing here was that for the SQL login or for the SQL authentication, we had to provide a password. When we did that of the Windows, we did not provide any password. And when it comes to the rows and the mappings, it's going to be the same thing as we had on the Windows login. So we can click on OK to create, or script this out to a new query window so we'll see how it looks like, but I'm going to click on OK. So now we see that login created here. This is the login that we just created. This is the SQL login, and this is the Windows login. And we can see the difference here. This is domain backslash the user, which is SVL backslash window user one. Why this is just SQL user one, there's no backslash and nothing before it. That's how you differentiate. And this is the script that created it. So I'll copy the script. Let me put it beneath the one for the Windows so we can compare. So we see this was a password that was used, and this is the script that created the Windows login, and this is the script that created the SQL login. We had to provide a password here. We didn't have to provide any password here. Now that the logins are created, they're supposed to have access to the server. So let's log into SQL Server with these new credentials. So I'm going to click on Connect, Database Engine. I'm going to use, for the first one, I'm going to do the SQL login. So it's this node. And we have SQL Server Authentication. The login, I'm going to use we use SQL user one. And the password, we had so we have logged in with the SQL authentication with the SQL user one. So we can see that right here. I would go ahead and expand this. And this other node at the top, this was where we had before. So let me show the both of them so we can see what can be done. Remember that when we created this user, SQL user at the bottom, we did not map that user to a database. So if I go ahead to expand the databases here, of course, we see the system databases, right? And we see the user database right here, DemoDB. If we attempt to go ahead to open this database, you see the error message that it gives because this user does not have access to the database because the user was not mapped to the database. Or I said user actually login. So that login, we don't have a user created for that login in this database. I would say okay, but if I go to the top right here and click on databases, and I click on this demo DB, I am able to expand this and even able to go ahead and take a look at the tables, right? Right now, if we expand the databases and we go to demo DB and we click on the security and we go take a look at the users that we have there, we see, like we showed earlier, that we have no user, right? SQL user one is not listed here as a user under that database. When we map the login to a database, it will automatically create a user under the database. So let's go ahead and grant this SQL user access to this database, this demo DB. So I'll have to do this from the top right here. This server where I logged in as an administrator, which is SQL slash or backslash author. I'll go to that login, go to security. Let's refresh this. Security, logins. And this is the user right here. So I'll right click, properties, and user mappings. I want to map it to DemoDB. Now, if you look here, the assets that I'm giving the user, I just map them to that database, but I'm not giving them any access to be able to read or write into the database. So for read, it means to be able to see what you have inside the database tables. Write, it means to be able to input data into the table. And all of these other rows right here are things that the user can do. So data reader means that they'll be able to read the things that we have in the tables inside the database. Data writer means to be able to impute. They'll be able to write into the table. Now, for backup operator, they'll be able to take backup of the databases that they are mapped to. And all of these, I would put a link in the description below so would know the functions and what they can do if we grant them these permissions. So first, let's go ahead and do public and see what happens. So public, I'll click on OK. Now that we've granted that mapping, we've mapped the login to the database DemoDB. If we go on that DemoDB and we go under security and we go under users, we see now that SQL user 1 is here. Automatically, it created a user under that database for SQL user 1 because we mapped the login to this database. So that tells us that mapping a login to a database automatically creates a user for that login in the specific database. And then I'll come down here and I would refresh this. And now that it's refreshed, let's see if we can gain access. I would expand the database and go to DemoDB. So we see now I can open this without that error, right? But let's go ahead and access the tables. We can see right here, I do not see any table in the database because this login, which is now a user of this database, was not granted the permission to be able to see that information. So if you want to see, so if we go back into this database and we come down to security of the database and we go to users, we see right here, we have a user now under the database called SQL user 1, but they don't have the permission to view those things inside the database, even though they have the permission to expand and open this without errors. Now, for them to be able to read the data in the database, in the tables of the database, we need to go grant them additional permission. Let's say go grant them um, data reader. So I'll go up here as an administrator, go back to this user, SQL user, right click, go to properties, come down to user mapping. We said we map them to DemoDB. I'm going to give them data reader so that they're able to read. And I'll click on OK. Now that we're giving them that permission, I'll come here and I'll refresh this. And let's go back to expand the database and DemoDB. Click on tables. Now we're able to see the table, DBO.person. I can right click and I can select top 10,000 rows and I'm able to read because I have been given that permission to read. So now we know that this user can read data now from this table, but if they decide to want to go ahead to say they want to put another row, they want to add data to the table, let's have like number 6, 6 records in the table. Can they actually do that without permission? So if I put down this script here to insert data into that table, let's try to see what they can do. I would highlight this and I will execute. We can see the error message that we're getting here. The insert permission was denied on the object. That's that table that's called person info, and the database is DemoDB. The schema is DBO. Let's go back to grant it that permission to see if we'll be able to do that. So I'm going to go back up here where I'm an administrator and go back to SQL user, right click, click on properties, click on user mapping, and demo DB is highlighted. We gave them data reader before. Now I'll do data writer, and I'll click OK. Come down here and refresh this. This connection that we have right here, I'm just going to disconnect and reconnect so that it can take advantage of the changes that have been made. So I'll put my password in here and then reconnect. So now I'm going to highlight this again, make sure I'm in the right database context, demo DB, and let's execute. We see one role affected. So now the user is able to impute data into that table. If I refresh and we go back to read from the table, right click on right here, let me scroll. So we see the table right here. I'm going to right click, now select top 1000 rows, or I can actually use this right here. Let's read from it. And we can see now we have a sixth row. The user is now able to both read and write on this database. So that is how you create users and logins in SQL Server. So what we did, first we created logins. We created the Windows login, and we also created a SQL login. So granting of permission, if we wanted to grant these Windows user permissions or map it to a database, it's going to be the same way we did for the SQL user. And that's why I'm not going to repeat it, because it's just the same thing. So we created that, and we also said that whenever you map a login to a database, it automatically creates a user inside that database. And we also showed how you can grant access to certain objects inside a database. So we did all of this using GUI, the graphical user interface, but you can also create logins and users using T-SQL. You can script out from GUI if you want to, or you can actually write those T-SQL. And there's a Microsoft documentation that can help here that I would put in the description below. And if you need to go through the Transact-SQL and how to create login and grant permissions, you'll be able to see them here. And there are also different other options to use, like creating logins from a certificate, and a couple of things that you can do when it comes to logging, and also create login from an SID, which I think I'll make a video for this to really explain what this is. But I'll put this link in the description below to help. If this video was helpful to you, you can hit the like button. And if you haven't subscribed yet, you can click on subscribe and also turn on the notification bell so you know when I post. Thank you for your time, and see you in the next video.